Um, can you hear me?
Yeah, once it's you did the Yahrzeit for next day, eh?
Yes, we've got actually two Yahrzeits today, technically, because we did the shear before Ma'ariv yesterday, which means we didn't technically cover the second Yahrzeit. We did in terms of thought, but not in actual quiet time period. So I'm going to share the screen, and then Kevin's going to start with the halacha. And the first thing that we'd all like to do, because we very good friends with Nick Friedman, is we'd like to wish Nick and his mom long life after the loss of Bernard Friedman, Dov Shaul Ben Yaakov, and please God, may the family only know simpers.
And long life to Mark and to Anton as well, his two brothers.
Yes, I don't know Mark and Anton as well, but they are lovely brothers, and I wish them long life as well. Absolutely.
And from myself as well.
And you know that just can I say one little connection that we have?
Of course.
They used to have a law practice in Germiston. They were loyal customers for many years, and his firm was called B.S. Friedman. I don't know what the S is. B was for Bernard, and really lovely family, lovely people. They should only have simchas.
Amen. Amen. And from Gavin and myself, obviously Arthur doesn't know them because he's in Israel, but I'm sure it comes from Arthur too. Now, one more dedication, because we didn't mention this yesterday, but we did this year, as we said, in Mincha time, so it didn't cover the 24th of Iyar. And that is as follows. I'm just going to share the screen now. I'd like to wish Margaret Kaplan and her siblings long life for the loss of her sister, also on the 24th of Iyar, of Ruth Bat Shmuel Raphael. And please God, may their family be blessed. And this year, both the halacha and the Gemara learning will be an aliyah for both of their neshamas.
Amen.
Bernard Friedman and Ruth. Okay, Kevin, would you like to teach us?
Yes. Okay. So the next thing, I found something here about meals on a Friday. Obviously, we're talking about things before Shabbat. So it says here one may not have a meal or feast, which translates to Seudah in Hebrew, on Friday or Erev Yom Tov, that is larger than one's ordinary weekday meal. The restriction applies the entire day. Okay, that's actually news to me. One may take us. Okay, let me repeat it. One may not have a meal or feast on Friday or Erev Yom Tov that is larger than one's ordinary weekday meal. Okay. Probably the main meal of the day, either lunch or dinner, whichever it is. The restriction applies the entire day. Then it goes on to say, one may take a snack or eat even an ordinary weekday meal throughout the day. However, after the 9th halachic hour, or from the time that one feels eating would spoil his appetite later that night, which during the winter is usually earlier than the 9th hour, it is a mitzvah to refrain from A, eating even an ordinary weekday meal. However, one who has already started eating need not stop. And B, excessive drinking to the extent that one feels fully satiated. And just one more point, we can continue this. Just another little mini paragraph here. One may have a meal that is larger than usual when the correct time for the specific meal is Friday. Some examples are a Brit Milah, even if the brit was postponed past the 8th day, a Pidyon Haben, even after 30 days have elapsed, a betrothal celebration, that would probably call it Sheva Brachot, but only for betrothal that took place on, that's a actual wedding celebration, which is actually more common in Israel. They have the actual ceremony and function on a Friday that took place on a Friday. Even then, it is better to postpone the meal. A contemporary engagement party may not be held on a Friday, if the engagement, even if the engagement wasn't held on another day, and then also a chuppah. So a chuppah, well, a chuppah actually goes with a betrothal. Oh, a betrothal celebration is like an engagement party, or like they call it a vort. Although it is last point, it is preferable. Although it is preferable to hold these meals in the morning, one may have the meal even after the time for mincha katana has arrived. Okay, just something interesting. As we say, food for thought, Damon.
Food for thought, absolutely. Okay, so Kev, thank you for teaching us. And listen, I owe you an apology. I realized yesterday when we did the shir, we actually didn't go through the halacha for some reason.
I didn't even remember. No, it's fine, but you rushed for time.
But Gavin, I think, had a meeting with affiliates, but I completely forgot. When looking back at the video, I'm so sorry, Kevin.
No, I forgot. I've forgotten about it. No, you have to apologize. I've completely forgot about it now. Okay, time has passed so quickly.
I'm going to share my screen. Just give me one fraction of a second. This will be the new subject matter. I'm going to start off with a summary first, because this is always the easier way to do it. We did deal with this in the 71st daf, but we're going to deal with this in the 72nd daf, because again, there's a time period difference between the two issues. So the first issue you have is shchita, which is the ritual act in order to make sure an animal is kosher. It has to be slaughtered in the right manner. So what we want to know is it considered shchita at the end of the process or at the start of the cutting of the trachea and esophagus? And surprise, surprise, there are two opinions. So if you look at that contrasting view in terms of when an animal is rendered unfit for use, we learned about idol worship in the 71st daf. We now in our Mishnah going to learn about if you're having a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard. Again, it's not eligible for benefit. In that way, it's like idol worship in terms of the animal's benefit to us. And obviously the proponent of idol worship gets the death penalty, whereas in this case, all that happens, the person can't for consumption. So some rabbis say that the minute you're looking at prohibited animals slaughtered, a non-consecrated animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard, at what point of the slaughter process does it become prohibited? And it mimics the same argument with idol worship. Some rabbis say at the beginning when the first incision is made with the scalpel, and other rabbis say at the end of the process when the trachea and esophagus is already been severed. Okay, so regarding the 4 or 5-fold payment for theft and slaughter of the animal, you must remember that it's at the end of the slaughtering process. So again, that's a very important thing to bear in mind. If ever there's any eligibility for that thief paying the 4 or 5-fold penalty for slaughtering an animal he stole, it's known as the end of the slaughtering process. So how does this get affected? That when the rabbis say that slaughter for idol worship or in the temple courtyard or anything that makes the animal prohibited, even if it's a little cut to start the process, the animal cannot be used for benefit. And thus, if the thief, in this case, starts to cut it, forget about the death penalty here. It just means that the thief need not pay the 4 or 5-fold payment to the original owner, as the original owner cannot use or benefit from it. So only a double payment is made. Gavin was quite concerned that the thief, by slaughtering the animal in a manner where its very nature of use was prohibited, the original owner would suffer. And we're saying, no, he doesn't get a 4 or 5-fold payment, 4-fold if it's sheep or 5-fold if it's an ox. but he certainly gets a double payment. So Gavin is double as good off as before it was stolen. So no problem as far as that's concerned. So this is the rabbi's opinion that say that the slaughtering for prohibited use renders the animal unfit for use at the beginning of the process. So then there's no eligibility for the 4 or 5-fold payment, because that eligibility only occurs at the end of the slaughtering process. Now, the other rabbis who say that slaughter for either idol worship or in the temple courtyard of a non-consecrated animal renders the animal prohibited for benefit at the end of the shechita process. And then obviously the 4 or 5-fold penalty is applied, because that would kick in just before you can no longer use the animal. So the thief in this case has to pay the 4 or 5-fold penalty. Is that clear, guys? I can't hear you. You're all on mute. I just want to know before we go on.
If I was on mute, how did you know I was talking?
Because I watch you.
Very, very impressive. Okay, I'm impressed. I'll stop falling asleep from now onwards. Listen,
Sure.
Isn't that a bit of a loophole? So I don't know if I heard everything correctly. I'm a bit dopey, but I'm doing my best. Did you, if a thief steals it and they shechter it, but they only hit that first what's it called, esophagus or wherever the first nerve, they don't hit the second one. The animal will still die eventually. It's just not kosher. Can't you get away then with the 4 or 5-fold payment then? But not if he slaughters it in a kosher way, he has to pay a 4 or 5-fold payment. If he slaughters it in an unkosher way, where he just hits the one nerve, that's the beginning of the process, is he covered? Is it based on that one nerve, or is it based on the animal actually being unable to be used because it's dead?
Excellent question. So we're not talking about a process of if we render it Ne'ilah prohibited for use, Nevada, sorry, not Ne'ilah, that's off Yom Kippur. I'm going to have to do Nevada to make up for the. Nevada, in other words, Gavin, we're not talking about if a shechita goes wrong and you've rendered a koshering, slaughtering animal unfit because you didn't kosher it, you didn't slaughter it correctly. We're not talking about that at all. What we're talking about here is that it was completely the right way to shecht the animal, that you have to cut the esophagus and the trachea. What we're saying is here is that a shechita is a shechita, but if you do that for idol worshipping, then the person that does that for idol worshipping gets the death penalty. And that animal is prohibited for benefit, even if the thief stole the animal and then slaughtered it for idol worship, because kimle b'di rabba minay, there would be no 4 or 5-fold payment then. If he got his agent to slaughter the animal, we learned the parallel case for idol worshipping is that you can take responsibility as a thief for the 4 or 5-fold payment, because if you sold the animal, just like a seller needs a buyer, so too a thief in this case might need somebody to help him slaughter the animal. In terms of why somebody would slaughter it for idol worship and get themselves a death penalty, who knows? Maybe it was just somebody that knew how to shecht animals, but happened to shecht it in a kosher way. Whatever people do, they do. But the point of it is, all we are saying is that the processes are different in terms of the time period. We're not talking about if you render it unfit for kashrut because you never severed it properly. Because then, even though it's not fit for human consumption, there is no 4 or 5-fold payment, you're correct, as far as that's concerned. So that's not an issue. But what we're saying is, what happens if it was slaughtered in a kosher manner, but either for idol worship, or alternatively, in our case that we're learning in this particular daf now, about a non-consecrated animal that's slaughtered in the temple courtyard. So what we are saying is, you've got a problem. Because if you look at what is considered the shchita process, the slaughtering, forget about the ineligibility for it. If a thief steals an animal and slaughters it, the slaughtering process is when you slaughter it. The term "it" equals entirety, meaning that it's at the end of the process. That's how most of the Rabbonim interpret shchita. A successful severing of the esophagus and trachea. It's at the end of the process. And then you're eligible for the 4 or 5-fold payment as the thief who slaughters the stolen animal, because even though the animal is no longer fit for benefit, the 4 or 5-fold penalty kicked in, because again, that's also at the end of the process. Now, you've only got a problem as far as those that say that the slaughtering a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard is considered to have started at the beginning of the process, because the eligibility for the 4 or 5-fold payment is at the end of the process. So if that prohibition of using an animal for benefit is there at the beginning of that shchita timeline, there's no eligibility for a 4 or 5-fold payment. You get the problem if the rabbis hold according to there. So that's the issue primarily we're dealing with. We dealt with it with idol worship. We're now dealing with it about the non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard. So let me start with the Gemara, but I thought those summary notes were pretty helpful.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, it just makes our lives a little bit easier. So the Gemara starts off as follows, and it says, if the thief slaughters it and it's found to be a treifa, or if he slaughters it as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard, he pays the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. So the Gemara infers a principle from the Mishnah's ruling that one who steals an ox or sheep and then slaughters it as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard pays the 4 or 5-fold payment. Rav Chavivi, the Mechazan, said to Rav Ashi, learn from this that shchita is only at the end of the slaughtering procedure. So what Rav Chavivi is suggesting is that our Mishnah's ruling is that a thief that steals an ox or sheep and then slaughters it as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard is liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment, and that demonstrates that shchita is said to occur only at the end of the slaughtering procedure, at the moment the trachea and esophagus are severed beyond the halfway mark. To answer your question, Gavin. So according to that opinion, the animal that the thief slaughtered indeed belonged to the original owner throughout the entire act of slaughter. And it's only at the very conclusion of the slaughtering process that an act of slaughtering as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard kicks in, which renders the animal prohibited for benefit. But because the 4 or 5-fold penalty kicked in before that, the thief must pay the original owner the 4 or 5-fold payment back. Okay, that's what it's implying. Now, for if shchita is from the beginning to the end of the slaughtering procedure, then why does the thief pay the 4 or 5-fold payment when he slaughters a stolen, non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard? Why? Once the thief cuts it a little, he has rendered it forbidden for benefit. And what does that mean? Is according to the view that shchita is from the beginning to the end, the non-consecrated animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard becomes forbidden for all benefit at the moment the shchita begins with the initial cut. Okay? So, accordingly, when he cuts the rest of the amount required to complete his act of slaughter, which would have technically made him liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment, it's not the animal of the original owner that he's slaughtering. So as the Gemara is going to establish below, even those who understand shchita as being from the beginning to the end agree that a thief is not liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment until he slaughters the animal in its entirety. Okay, so what we're saying is now that the Gemara is rejecting the inference that when the rest of the animal is required to complete his act of slaughter, it makes him liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment. It's not the animal of the original owner it's slaughtering. So what does the Gemara reject? That the shchita process, making it prohibited for use, is at the first cut. We know that the shchita to make it eligible for the 4 or 5-fold payment is at the end, but to make it forbidden for benefit at the beginning, which means there's no 4 or 5-fold payment, the Gemara rejects the inference. Why? Rav Huna, the son of Rava, said to him, when is he liable in our Mishnah to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for slaughtering a stolen animal as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard? It's for that little portion of the slaughter that he's liable. In other words, Rav Huna, the son of Rava, basically argues that the thief's liability to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for slaughtering is in fact incurred as soon as he makes the initial decision to chef the animal, because there's a mental decision and there's a physical decision. We're going to discuss pigul just now. We learned it in Sanhedrin, but let's just keep this argument. So for the initial cut, at that point, the animal still belongs to the original owner. So he's saying that, so he's basically saying that at that particular point, there's eligibility. So the Gemara reestablishes the inference. Rav Ashi said to him, do not reject Rav Chavivi's proof in this manner, for in order to be liable for slaughter, we need to fulfill the verse, and he slaughters it, which implies the entirety of it, meaning he must perform a complete act of slaughter, and this is lacking when he slaughters it only a little. So you can see Rav Ashi is arguing with Rav Huna, the son of Rava, because Rav Huna, the son of Rava, is saying that the minute the thief starts the initial incision, it's at that point that he's liable for the 4 or 5-fold payment. And Rav Ashi is saying, no, it uses the term in the pasuk, slaughtered it, which means the entirety of it, a complete act of slaughter. And that doesn't happen when you just slaughter it a bit. So the Gemara asks, but then we've got a difficulty. If shchita is from the beginning to the end, then the non-consecrated animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard becomes forbidden for all to benefit. And Gavin, including the thief, by the way, it doesn't help him either. He can't do anything with it either, never mind the original owner, with the initial decision. So, in other words, how can the thief be liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment when he completes the slaughter? Because we're saying if the shchita renders it almost what do you call it, a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard, forbidden for benefit, how can the thief ever be liable for the 4-fold or 5-fold payment? Because that's determined when he completes the slaughter. So it's already been prohibited. So the Gemara answers, Rav Ashi said to him, thus said Rav Gamda in the name of Rava, the Mishnah's ruling that the thief is liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for slaughtering the animal as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard pertains in a case where he slaughtered part of the pipes outside the temple courtyard and he completed the slaughtering inside the temple courtyard. So what we're saying is the trachea and the esophagus were cut outside the temple courtyard. So that doesn't prohibit the animal forbidden for use because it's not consecrated. It's fine outside the temple courtyard. And what are we saying is that when he completed it inside the courtyard, the actual process, the animal was situated basically outside the temple courtyard when the shchita began. And it entered the temple courtyard only at the moment that he completed the severing of the majority of the 2 pipes, the trachea and the esophagus. So it became prohibited as a non-consecrated animal slaughtered inside the temple courtyard only at the end of the slaughter. But prior to that point, throughout the entire shchita, it was permitted. So it remained the property of the original owner throughout the entire shchita. And the thief is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. So in that way, we learn that if you consider that the 4, 5, or fivefold is eligible at the beginning for payment of slaughter, all you have to do is slaughter the beginning part out of the temple courtyard and then finish it in the temple courtyard. Or if you want to say that it's prohibited for use from the initial cut, then you cut it outside the temple courtyard and you finish your shchita inside the temple courtyard, and that would kick in the fourfold or fivefold payment. So the moral of the story is, as Gavin said, if you want to be a thief to get off the hook, you slaughter it in the temple courtyard. But then the problem is, Gavin, what was the point of the whole exercise if the can't benefit from the animal either? There's no
He's a thief. He doesn't care. You'll still benefit.
How? Who's he going to sell it to?
What's that?
Who's he going to sell it to?
Oh, no. If he wants to eat it, to sell might be a problem, but he can eat it.
Yeah, he could. But it's, you have people that are not are scared to steal, are not scared to steal, but they're scared to get kares. Just think of that. And the idol worshiping cases.
There are different levels. You're right.
And the idol worshiping case is even worse. He might not be scared of kares, but he might not like the death penalty. So, the Gemara is presenting a different version of the preceding discussion. We've got 10 minutes left, guys. There are those who teach in the preceding discussion as having taken place with reference to the following dispute. Okay? According to the first version, Rav Chavivi initiated the discussion while studying our Mishnah. According to this version we're doing now, he initiates this discussion while studying the Amorite dispute that the Gemara proceeds to cite. Okay? Rav Shimon ben Lakish said in the name of Rav Levi the elder, Shchita is only at the end of the slaughtering procedure, okay, which means this has got a practical significance with regards to one who slaughters an offering with intent to eat its meat outside the permitted boundaries, or after its allotted time, or if he slaughtered it for the sake of a different offering. So what we're saying is here, the thought process in these matters have no effect on the offering unless they took place during the shchita, which according to this view means at the end of the shchita. So what we are saying is, Gavin, we learned in Sanhedrin with Rav Simcha Steinhauer that pigul is the Kohen decides to consume it after the allotted time, the meat, and then he gets kares if he does. And even if he finishes it in time before the allotted period, but his mind was not to eat it in time, he gets kares. So the thought process can generate kares. So we're saying that if the shchita is at the end of the process, your thoughts only have to be on the right intent at the end of the process, because that's when it counts. If the slaughtering prohibited for benefit is at the initial cut, your thought process has to be right from the beginning. Does that make sense? 5
p.m.
I'll sort it out.
Just say that again, please, Damon.
So, okay, Kevin, if one slaughters an offering with intent to eat it outside the offering's permitted boundaries, like in the temple area, the offering is invalid and prohibited for consumption. So it's about intent. So in other words, the intent is, so this opinion maintains that only the completion of the shchita process is legally defined as an act of slaughter. So any mental thought process that the slaughterer has during the shchita process prior to the completion is not considered to have been made at the time of slaughter, and thus has no negative impact on the offering. So what we're saying is, if he takes it to a non-consecrated area, starts off with intent to take it to the consecrated area, we're going to see what the implication is there. Because the action hasn't happened, but the intent is there. Okay? So shchita is only at the end of the slaughtering procedure, according to Rav Shimon ben Lakish in the name of Rav Levi the elder. But Rav Yochanan said shchita is from the beginning to the end. Okay? So in other words, if the slaughterer had any thoughts during any part of the shchita process, it's deemed an act of slaughter with a negative thought, and that offering is affected accordingly, and it's prohibited. That's in Chullin 29b, according to Rashi. So on this, Rav Chavivi, the Bachozan, remarked to Rav Ashi, shall we say that Rav Yochanan holds that the prohibition against benefiting from non-consecrated animals that were slaughtered in the temple courtyard is not biblical? In other words, that there's a disputed Kedushin in the 58th daf whether the prohibition against benefiting from a non-consecrated animal that was slaughtered in the temple courtyard is biblical and rabbinic. So we're going to see the implication. Guys, we don't have too much time left. I've got 6 minutes, quickly. Okay. For if it should enter your mind to say that it's biblical, according to Rav Yochanan, you will be confronted with the following difficulty. Why does our Mishnah hold that the thief is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment for slaughtering the stolen animal as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard? Because according to Rav Yochanan, who views shchita as being from the beginning to the end, in other words, as soon as the thief slaughters it a little, he's rendered it forbidden for benefit. So when he slaughters the rest, it's not the animal the original owner is slaughtering. And then rather it must be that it's suggesting Rav Yochanan holds that a non-consecrated animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard becomes forbidden for benefit only under rabbinic law. And although initial cut renders it forbidden under rabbinic law, since it's permitted under biblical law, the animal remains in the possession of the original owner, and the thief will become liable to the fourfold, fivefold payment. Okay? But the Gemara replies, Rav Achi, the son of Rama, said to him, you've got no proof from here. Rav Yochanan may indeed maintain that the prohibition against benefiting from the non-consecrated animals slaughtered in the temple courtyard is in fact biblical. And when too is he liable to our Mishnah to the fourfold or fivefold payment for slaughtering the stolen animal as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard? It's for that little portion of slaughter that he's liable. So what it's saying is here is that just as Rav Yochanan maintains that the beginning of the shchita process constitutes an act of shchita with regard to slaughtering non-consecrated animals in the temple courtyard, so it constitutes an act of shchita with respect to the thief's liability to the fourfold or fivefold payment for slaughtering the stolen animal. It's basically saying that the liability would be for the initial cut. So Rav Ashi said to him, do not reject Rav Chavivi's proof in this manner. In order to be liable for slaughter, we need the verse to say, and he slaughters it, which implies the entirety of it. In other words, he must perform a complete act of slaughter, and this is lacking when he slaughters it only a little. So when Rav Acha, son of Rava, said to him, you've got no proof from here, Rav Yochanan can hold it biblical. He might say the reason you're eligible to the fourfold or fivefold payment is the thief's penalty for stealing and slaughtering an animal occurs at the initial incision, just before the initial incision is rendering it unfit for benefit because it's a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard. So he's saying if those two things are considered at the beginning, the thief would still be eligible for the fourfold or fivefold payment. Rav Ashi said to him, it's a problem, because the term slaughtering it, a proper act of shchita, means at the completion of the slaughter. So then the original difficulty remains, are we not forced to say that Rav Yochanan holds that the prohibition against benefiting from a non-consecrated animal slaughtered in the temple courtyard is only rabbinic, as Rav Chavivi shows? Rav Ashi said to him, no, we can deflect Rav Chavivi's proof in a different way. Thus said Rav Gamda in the name of Rava, when is he liable to for slaughtering a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard according to our Mishnah? In a case where he slaughtered part of the pipes outside the temple courtyard and he completed the shchita inside the temple courtyard. So what he's saying is that it could be biblical, in fact. All that would have to happen is that the thief would have to start the process outside the temple courtyard, so it's not prohibited for benefit. And then when he takes it in to the temple, he's already eligible for the 4 or 5-fold payment because he's stolen and committed slaughter. and then the animal is cut off benefit from use as soon as it enters the temple courtyard, then they would be eligible for the 4 or 5-fold payment. All right, guys, we're done.
Scott.